All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another wonderful Aquarium Online Academy today. My name is Jen, and joining me in the studio is Talia, who's going to be controlling everything that we see behind me. And then on question control is Allie. So she's going to be taking in any kind of questions, comments, observations that you might have. So feel free to go on ahead and text it right on in. I think Talia will put the text line right on in here for us. Excellent. 562-286-1838 is the place to go for texting. And if you do happen to be a younger viewer today, make sure that you get adult permission, as texting rates do apply or can apply. And then if you're watching this and it is not Friday at 10 a.m., you can go on ahead and email us any questions that you might have down below at live@lbaop.org. But our goal today, friends, is to talk a lot about corals. So here we have what I like to kind of think of as a zoomed in webcam of ours. It's actually of our Coral Predators exhibit. So here at the aquarium, during the summer, we debuted a special corals exhibit. And so here we have one of our special webcams and one of my favorite animals right here, which we'll get to later on today, is a bicolored parrotfish. So I'm just stepping out of the screen because I would love for you to make some observations, right? So we can pretend we're basically like a scuba diver or snorkeler underneath the water. And this is pretty much, what you might see when you think of a coral reef. Now, it's called coral predators due to the animals that live in this exhibit, and they're the ones that tend to munch on the corals. But what do you notice about the environment, about the corals themselves, about the animals that live in these coral reef habitats? Do you see any common features amongst some of them? Do you see any that are very different from one another, whether it be, the corals itself, the fish themselves? Is there anything that really kind of stands out to you, perhaps? I know for me, something that I've been noticing that's been pretty much the same amongst all of these animals is that all of these fish happen to be very slender, right? So they come in different sizes, like our parrotfish here, fairly large. But then we have like our butterfly fish over here that are much smaller. But something that they all seem to have in common is that they're very narrow or slender, right? Like you can see them pretty well on the sides, but when you look at them straight on, right, they're very skinny. So that's an observation that I had. Do any of you happen to have any additional observations? Be thinking that there's colors, right? Definitely a very colorful environment that we have here. The fish are incredibly colorful, right? I mean, the amazing different colors that our parrotfish have. It's pretty cool. Now, there are others that maybe are more simple, right? We have some other fish that are mainly, yellow and black and white, perhaps, and we have others that are bright red or bright pink or orange even in coloration. Now, interestingly enough, right, our corals that we can see here, they are also brightly colored too. So how do you think having these bright fish, what do you think might be the point of these fish being so bright, living in a bright habitat? I'm going to keep you with that question. Feel free to go on ahead and text in your answers if you happen to know why we happen to have these bright on bright and really bright kind of environments. Now, this I mentioned is kind of like a zoomed in version, right? We're up and close right next to a coral reef. But we also have, and this exhibit actually happens to be one of our smaller ones, but it gives us a nice chance to really look at all the cracks and crevices of the coral reef. Now, we do have another camera, which I'm going to have Talia switch to, which is going to be our largest exhibit here at the aquarium. It's going to be our Tropical Reef Gallery, which has over 350,000 gallons. And this webcam that Talia is going to be pulling up in a little bit really kind of looks at the bigger picture. So I'd love for you to be able to then compare and contrast and really be able to see, what do you notice here, right? What similarities do you see? What differences do you notice? Now, this is actually only one view of our large exhibit. There are several other viewing windows, which are on the other side, as it is a large exhibit. But what do you notice here? Do you notice similar animals? I definitely see a lot of fish, right? Once again, in that similar kind of body shape, really long and, on the side, but very narrow down the middle. I also see lots of color. Oh, wait a minute. Do you see that right above my head? definitely not like a fish that we've seen earlier, right? So we have, and I'll keep on stepping out of the way because I keep on taking up its space. And it's really cool to see. This is an eagle ray that we happen to have. Looks like it might be playing with some bubbles that it has on the side of our exhibit right here. There's another bat ray that's moving through our screen currently. There it goes, right? So we have some larger animals like sharks even in here as well, right? So our coral reef ecosystem is not just full of colorful fish, right? Small or maybe medium in size, but we also have large animals too, right? We have some of those sharks, and we also have some large rays. That's another type of ray that we happen to have here. And so a coral reef, right, is a very dynamic environment, a very diverse environment where we have a ton of different animals, even our zebra shark right here, right? And there's our eagle ray. Oh, this is absolutely perfect. I'm just going to step out of the way and have you all get a chance to enjoy just the diversity that we happen to have within this exhibit, right? Oh, yeah, one of our bonnethead sharks, the smallest of the hammerhead family, got to have a chance to see here, right? So this environment, this is like the quintessential picture perfect coral reef habitat that we would imagine out in the wild. But our class today is focusing on coral reefs and conservation, right? So our goal today is to not only get a sneak peek into learning a little bit about some of the animals that live within this ecosystem, but also what are some of the challenges that they are facing, right? What does that look like? How can we help? What's some science that's being done out there, and who's doing that research? So our goal today is to be able to cover all of that within the next 22 minutes or so of our program, right? So I love how you all were probably making observations. I may be slightly telepathic, right, in regards to all the different, the diversity of these animals, right? There's so many different kinds of fish here, and coral reefs are actually a biodiversity hub. So we have a huge amount of animals, biodiverse, meaning lots of different kinds of life, right? We have these corals that we see here. We have these fish. We have these sharks. We have these rays. We have so many animals that actually live in between all the nooks and crannies of these coral reefs, from a lot of sea stars to worms and everything in between. So let's go on ahead and let's go on and delve a little bit deeper into corals, right? Because I kind of gave it away, but corals are animals. Now, if we go on ahead and we think about this, right? All of these corals that we see right here. Oh, here's a bright view of our live coral exhibit because guess what? All the corals that we've been seeing in our other exhibits, they're fake. Yep, they aren't real. They are fake. And that's because, well, maybe you can figure out towards the end of the show, and we'll talk about that, right? This is our live coral exhibit. So anything that you notice here that's different than our other two exhibits? Well, if you're thinking, first of all, it's really bright blue behind me, you got it, right? So we have to have special lighting for these corals to be able to survive. And that's something that's really important as we kind of think of a coral reef ecosystem, right? But something similar that I am seeing are all the different, one variety of fish, right? They're all really colorful, but so are the corals, right? And I'm seeing those same different kinds of corals, right? I'm seeing some, like I've seen in the other two places, some that are more what we like to call branching corals right here that look like little tree branches or tree branch nubs, right? I'm seeing other corals that are more kind of, they almost look like a bowl or a vase, right here, that you might put like your fruits or veggies in, right? Put it on display perhaps, or have it in your kitchen. There are other corals, right, if I step out of the way, that are more floofy looking, like we have right here, right, that are very bendy. And so we actually have different kinds of corals. We have soft corals that are ones that can sway and move along. Then we also have a lot of hard corals, which are more of these ones that are very like stiff and that don't move around, much kind of like our fluffier ones right here. And so there are different kinds of corals, and we can see that, some of them are looking more like little baskets of mushrooms, right? So they come in all different shapes and colors and sizes, and all have their function within that coral reef ecosystem. Now, today for our class, we're going to be focusing a little bit on the hard corals, not so much the soft corals like the floofier one back here, more along the lines of these branching corals here. Now, I did mention that it's an animal. So how is it that this coral, here's a nice close-up, right? Different variety, but same idea, right? How is this an animal? Hmm. Are there any parts on this animal that you may recognize or that look familiar to you in regards to maybe other sea creatures? Hmm. 'Cause, that's actually how scientists do it. When they get a chance to see an animal that they are unfamiliar with, maybe for the first time, they think of all those similar characteristics, right, of a particular grouping of animal, and they're like, oh, yes, I see those same features in this animal. I wonder if it may be part of this particular group, right? So we can do that here with ours. Now, something that I see that may be familiar, right, is that they have almost like little round circular amounts of tentacles on them. At least they look like tentacles, right? And they have little dots in the middle, kind of like their little mouths right there. So, believe it or not, these animals, or this coral right here, is an entire colonial group of animals. So if you're wondering, what exactly is a colony of animals? It's just a group of animals that share a common space and a common area. So for instance, with this set of coral, with this coral right here, they all basically live in an apartment complex that they build together. They have something called a calcium carbonate skeleton, and that is the base in which all this living tissue sits upon. And then each one of these is an individual, what we like to call coral polyp, right? And they all have those stinging tentacles, and they all have their little mouths that get fed from the stinging tentacles, right? So what do you think they might be stinging? Because this is a really close-up version of these corals. If you're thinking of plankton, yeah, for sure, right? So these little tentacles are stinging any kind of plankton that might be in the water, bringing it into the mouth, and helping this coral overall to survive. But interestingly enough, if we think about the California coast that we're from, our waters look nothing like the gorgeous tropical waters that you see for coral reefs, right? Ours are really cold, they're murky, they're hard to see, versus these lovelies, right? They live in beautiful, crystal clear waters, kind of like what you would see in like Hawaii, for instance, right? And that is because of plankton. So all of the plankton that's in our waters, right? We have a ton of it, which makes our waters very murky. It's all the nutrients in the water and all the plankton that give our waters the color and the murkiness that we have here. Now, the tricky thing is, in clear waters, like off the coast of Hawaii, right, they don't have as many nutrients and they don't have as much plankton as we would here in California. And that's due to a lot of different factors, including temperatures and currents and nutrient amounts and winds and water temperature and everything else. There's a lot of different factors, right? But with these corals that we have right here, they have something that really kind of helps them during those times where they might not get a whole lot of food. And that's due to a symbiotic relationship that these corals have with something known as Zoxanthellae. Now, Zoxanthellae is a type of algae that lives within these corals. And so with these Zoxanthellae, what they're able to do is have a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between the two. And what that basically means is that these organisms are both mutually benefiting from it. So right here you can kind of see some of the little dots. Then those brownish dots are the Zoxanthellae that pretty much live and provide the color for a lot of these different tissues that you're seeing that make up these coral reefs. Now, with it being an algae, right, what do you think it might need to survive? If you're thinking sunlight, you got it, right? And then nutrients, right? So it definitely needs some sort of vitamin intake to be able to produce same thing that trees do and other algae do, right? Oxygen, but also sugars, right? And so with these Zoxanthellae, they're able to get the nutrients from inside of the coral itself. So the coral eats and it's able to give some of those nutrients to the algae, and the algae uses that plentiful sunlight that's found in the tropics along with those nutrients, and they're able to give some sugar back to the coral, right? So, and also gives these Zoxanthellae somewhere to live as well. These Zoxanthellae can move in and out, so they are kind of like roommates. They aren't necessarily born with them. The Zoxanthellae are actually an algae that swims into them. Now, this can be very important due to some conservation reasons, right? Because this is a partnership and they need to be happy and healthy, if at any time maybe the conditions aren't right? Maybe the water temperature is getting too hot or too cold, or maybe more likely too hot, right? Or maybe the water's getting murkier. Maybe there's a lot of construction nearby and a lot of mud's going out into the water, and they aren't able to get that sunlight, right? Well, then there is a chance that these zooxanthellae can move out of the coral, and they can either go into a new coral, maybe where there's better conditions, but they would basically move out, and it would be really tricky for this coral to survive without its roommates, right? But the roommates could come back if conditions do get better. So there isn't, all hope is not lost, right? But there definitely is a certain window of opportunity for these animals, for these corals, right, to live happy and healthy with their symbiotic roommates, right? So it's kind of a tricky balance. But as we'll talk about, right, all of this balance is really important in keeping these ecosystems, well, all of our ecosystems, whether it be ocean or land, right, happy and healthy. So with that, right, we have a lot of different other animals that rely on these corals in order to survive. And so here we have a nice variety of fish that allow that to do so. But Talia, I was hoping that maybe we could go back to coral predators to really focus in on several of the fish there. And one of those actually being some butterfly fish. And so with these fish that we'll see in a minute, you'll notice, right, that same kind of general shape where we have these fish that are very slender, right? We're going back to that slenderness. Now, how do you think that slenderness might help an animal that really likes to eat coral? Well, maybe if this parrotfish gets out of the way, then we can see the coral a bit better, right? But here, as we can take a look, right, all of these fish are going into these nooks and crannies of all of these coral reefs right here. And so that slender body and how they're able to, move to the side and utilize their body shape really allows them to get into those cracks and crevices. Now, their mouth also helps too. Here we have an example of one, right? And you can see that it has a very slender mouth. And that slender mouth really allows it to not only get into those slender cracks and crevices, but get a little bit deeper to eat some of that algae and stuff that lives within the coral itself. And so it's a special kind of predator that really is able to get into those nooks and crannies and to kind of, help keep our ecosystem in balance to make sure that, things aren't getting too sick and things are staying alive and that we're happy and healthy in that regards. But another animal that also helps with that is that parrotfish. And we had a chance to see that bicolored parrotfish a little bit ago. But if we go ahead and we get a closer look of a parrotfish itself, right, there are some interesting key features. And so it too is kind of slender-ish, not as slender as some of those butterfly fish, but a key feature is definitely these teeth right here, right? So what they have are basically beak-like teeth, and I'll actually just move over to the other side here, right? And these beaked teeth that they happen to have are really great at munching at corals. And they're able to munch at these corals by basically taking chunks off of the coral itself, right? So it's able to really kind of crunch through that skeletal structure, and it's able to grind it all up. And as they go on ahead and do so, what ends up being pooped out are white sandy beaches. So it's kind of fun in that regards, right? But the important thing about these, aside from making lots of sand, which is super important for a lot of other animals that depend on sand as their preferred habitat and not the corals themselves, but it also breaks down the coral. And you're wondering, well, how can this be helpful? I've heard that coral takes a long time to grow, and indeed it does. But the really neat thing about these parrotfish is they help manage corals. Now, not all corals grow at equal speeds. Some corals grow really quickly while others grow super slowly. And all these corals need different conditions in order to thrive, right? So to kind of keep with that biodiversity again, right, that diversity of coral life in this case, right, these parrotfish really play an integral part into getting a better understanding of coral structure dynamics. So what they're able to do is really kind of nibble down on a lot of those faster growing corals, and it enables those slower growing corals to be able to get more light and to be able to grow and be a little bit more successful. So it really helps kind of keep that balance. But something else that really helps keep coral reefs in balance just overall are many sharks. Now, we had a chance to see some of those sharks in Shark Lagoon. Oh, not Shark Lagoon. We do have sharks there. It's another webcam of ours. But but I meant more of our tropical reef exhibit, right? So our big trop exhibit. And so with that, these sharks are really a great indicator species of happy and wellness in coral reefs. Like much like how we talked about how seeing a diverse amount of corals and seeing a diverse amount of fish is really important, where sharks play a really great role is really getting a chance to understand, what they do, which is, well, they go on ahead and they pick off a lot of the dead fish that may be around, or the dying fish, the sick ones that really aren't moving very well. And they're keeping the population happy and healthy, and they're keeping the amount of diseased animals down, right? Because having a lot of disease isn't really super great. And so the goal is for them to really kind of keep things in check and keeping populations healthy. And usually when we see a lot of healthy coral reefs, we'll see a whole set of a diverse amount of animals from all different trophic levels, right? Because we're seeing animals that eat the algae, like those butterfly fish. And then we saw animals like our parrotfish that actually eat the coral structure itself. And then we have sharks, right, that kind of help manage all the fish populations. So they all have their roles to play. Now the interesting thing is that, studying sharks out in the tropics, you might think might not be too bad, right? Beautiful, crystal clear water, might be easy to see. But here's the thing. Sharks don't always like to see humans around. And maybe if we are around, well, we are affecting sometimes their local area. And so in order for us to really be able to study the sharks, we have to be in the water. Now, that sounds fine by me. I don't mind doing that. But the tricky thing is, we're humans. We have to pee. We have to snack, right? We get thirsty. We're very demanding creatures. And so with that, if we're in the water for like a very long time, right, we tend to need we have those different demands. And so with that, scientists have gone ahead and they've figured out something very clever. They've chosen to use something called baited remote underwater videos. And so it's called BRUVs for short, BRUV. And with that, scientists are able to put basically it's a video, right? So you have to put a camera underneath the water. Now, of course, that's fine and all, but if you're really trying to get an assessment of what kind of sharks live in the area, something that you can do is bait it, right? So basically this camera sits on top of this tripod that's on the bottom of the ocean, and this camera then has a long pole where there is then a baited pocket, basically, of snacks that are located a little bit below that. So the goal is to really see what kind of sharks live in those regions. And so the sharks are able to smell that food, and they're able to all come together, and scientists are then able to watch many of these videos for hours long, and then be able to figure out what kind of sharks are nearby. And so we're just going to play a short snippet right here. This is from Global Fin Prints, which are the folks that are using these baited remote underwater videos. And this is just a sampling of what one might see. Now, we here at the Aquarium of the Pacific have partnered up with Global Fin Prints, and we have volunteers that look at this footage and report what they're noticing, right? What are the amount of sharks that they're seeing? What kind of sharks are they seeing? Are there certain behaviors that are worth taking note? What about the fish? Are they seeing a lot of fish? How are the fish interacting with the environment? How are the sharks interacting in the environment, right? So all of these different kinds of questions, we can get a sneak peek into what's going on by just watching these videos. And what's awesome is that I mentioned scientists, right? And you might be thinking the professional variety. Well, guess what? You are also a scientist too, right? And so anyone that practices science is a scientist. And so if you're like, yeah, this is cool, I want to be able to help science. There are so many what's called citizen science projects that are out there in different ways that you can use your science skills to kind of help out researchers and help contribute to the science field, which is pretty awesome, right? So we have several volunteers that really come in and take a look at this footage and report back to us, which we then report back to Global Fin Print. So it's really cool, the different kinds of partnerships here at the aquarium we could have, but also ways that, folks can go on ahead and participate in science research. Now, if you're like, you know what, that's cool and all, but maybe I want to help out in a different way, not to worry, right? So we talked a lot about coral reefs and their threats, and some of that includes temperatures, right? If those temperatures get too high, then basically those Zoxanthellae roomies basically move out, right? And they find a new coral, a new area to live. And when that happens, and these corals are without their Zoxanthellae roommates for a long time, these corals tend to basically, well, lack of nutrients, lack of roomies means lack of food and lack of life, right? So these corals end up becoming bleached, where we have all these corals that used to be vibrant in color and now are white and completely dead. And that's been happening a lot around the world due to a lot of environmental stressors. So if we go on ahead and we think about why exactly is the water warming up, a lot of that has to do with climate change. So if we think about a lot of the fossil fuels that are being, a lot of carbon, right, that's being or basically being introduced into our atmosphere, right? A lot of that is in regards to fossil fuels, carbon dioxide, right? And these fossil fuels are like gas and coal, and that burning of gas and coal basically releases all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And what ends up happening is that all of this carbon dioxide, as it travels up into the atmosphere, then basically gets trapped there. So imagine if you had a blanket, right? And right now is a great time to be feeling nice and cozy underneath that blanket. And you're like, I want another one just for extra coziness. So now you have like a nice warm blanket. And then you're like, okay, I'm pretty warm now. I think I'm going to take my blankets off. But then you can't. And you just get really, really, really hot, right? That's basically what our Earth is dealing with right now. All of that carbon dioxide, all that rampant amount of carbon dioxide, so a ton of it being produced all at once, right, is being shoved up into our atmosphere, and it's creating this heat-trapping blanket, basically, which is doing a lot of different things, including increasing wildfires and droughts and a lot of other environmental changes. But the main one that affects our coral here is the warming of the temperature of the oceans that they live in. And so some things that you can do to be able to help that, there's a ton of different ways. Can you think of any particular way that you can maybe help reduce climate change? Well, if you're thinking turning off a light, for sure, right? You can totally do those simple steps. And everyone has to start at some level, right? So whatever works for you, definitely go for it, right? Maybe it's to be able to reduce your trash, because believe it or not, a lot of trash ends up creating methane, which is even worse than carbon dioxide, and all that decomposing gases from landfills goes up into the air and stays trapped as well, right? And so methane's even worse than carbon dioxide. So maybe you can, reduce the amount of trash that you have. Have maybe ways in which you reuse some of the items that you have. Bringing a water bottle, right? Even having a garden and giving out maybe some herbs to your friends, right? So that way they don't have to buy herbs from the supermarket and spend like $4, right? And then half of that goes to waste anyways, and you're like, oh man, right? Struggle's pretty real there, right? And so you can just go on ahead and you can give out little bits here and there because herbs grow quickly, right? And you can reduce the amount of food waste, right? And that is huge too. So it's not always about driving an electric vehicle, right? Even though that can help. But is that accessible to everyone? Not always, right? So no matter where you're at, find ways to either get a reusable water bottle, or maybe you have an herb garden that you put on your windowsill, right? That also takes in a little bit of carbon dioxide. But whatever your passions are, right? Find a way to make it more sustainable. Find a way to be able to kind of reduce your carbon footprint, if you will, right? So sustainable can mean a lot of different things depending upon the fields that you're in and what you're looking into. But basically, overall, you're creating less waste and less of an impact on the environment, right? That's the goal of sustainability, is to really kind of reduce your impact on the environment. And if you want to go one step further, if you're like, yeah, I got the sustainability down, I challenge you to look into regenerative ways of helping our planet. Regenerative basically means ways to be able to make the planet better than where it is now, right? So it's not just like reducing your footprint, but taking it one step further, right? What more can you do, right? Whether it be regenerative farming or anything along those lines, right? There are lots of ways that you can even help improve the environment, and I challenge you to do that too. All right, friends. Well, unfortunately, we are all out of time, but hopefully you now had a chance to learn a little bit about corals, the importance of them, the importance of biodiversity within coral reef ecosystems, some ways here at the aquarium that we help scientists and researchers monitor sharks that are found within the coral reef ecosystems, some challenges that they face like climate change, and ways that you could help. Now, if you do have any other questions or comments, or if you want to learn a little bit more, you want to have any additional resources and you don't know where to go, feel free to go on ahead and email us at live@lbaop, and we'd be happy to help you out in any way that we can and answer any questions that you might have. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your day and weekend because it is Friday. Yay. All right, have a great day, everyone. Bye.